TAKEdown MMA, The Fight Magazine's Evan Herzog, Grinder Fitness, Albert Rosales, and we are here for our second segment of the day. The Heavyweight Grand Prix continued Friday night in Connecticut at the Mohegan Sun, and we had Matt Mitrione versus Big Country Roy Nelson, Part 2.
Yep.
It was a rematch, but it was spread out. Obviously, we're talking about a half a decade plus since the first time they fought. Of course, Roy Nelson won that first fight by knockout. Matt Mitrione, to me, we might departure a little bit on this one. To me, he looked really good on his feet. I saw enough out of him on his feet to have some confidence going forward. Roy Nelson's a tough dude because I thought Matt hit him with some really good stuff. He was throwing that lead right uppercut all night, kind of throwing it as a jab. And I thought he did really well. When it hit the ground, that was kind of another story. But that's kind of always been the story with Matt. It's something that he definitely needs to improve on. But Matt Mitrione did get the unanimous decision victory. Well, actually, it wasn't unanimous. It was a majority decision because one guy did have it a draw. So I'll kind of get into a little bit of what I saw out of him, but I want the coach's take first.
Well, first of all, like everybody knows my thoughts on this whole tournament. I think this tournament is just disgusting.
That was the first heavyweight fight of the tournament, right?
It's got 185ers in it, it's got 205ers in it, it's got heavyweights, and then it's got old heavyweights. You know, like I'm not a fan of the tournament, but I genuinely thought Mitrione or Frank Mir was going to be the heavy favorite in this tournament. I just didn't think there was anybody that could really keep up with those guys with their size plus what they do, what they do well. Mitrione I thought looked really well, really good, but I think the issue I had was his wrestling. His wrestling is horrible, and now looking at it, I definitely think Bader's got a much better shot. Should Bader get past King Mo, I think he's got a very, very good shot of beating Matt Mitrione, and maybe that kind of opens this tournament up a little bit now. I fully expect Frank Mir to win his fight. Okay, he's probably the favorite on that side of the bracket. You come back to this side with Mitrione. If you take Mitrione out of there, who knows what happens. But it does give me hope for Bader. I would like to see Bader win this thing just to kind of
have two
give
belts.
Bellator the screw job for putting smaller guys into a heavyweight tournament. But hey, man,
wouldn't that be interesting if he just kind of an off thought that made me think about? Wouldn't that be interesting if Bader did win and you have the light heavyweight champion and he's also the heavyweight champion, and then say DC pulls it off against Miocic? Wouldn't that be kind of a strange time to be alive with Bellator and UFC both having?
Who would have ever seen that?
Two, that'd be crazy, especially But I mean, we obviously know who the better champion would be at that point because I love Ryan Bader too, but he had opportunities, in the UFC, and I think it was great for him to go to Bellator so he could really be dominant.
Well, to me, like Bader was a lot like Rory McDonald. McDonald just couldn't get over that hump. Like the top two guys, he just couldn't get past those two guys. And I kind of feel like Bader was the same way because Bader does a lot of things well. He's competent with his hands, obviously his wrestling and his groundwork. He's got good power. He does a lot of things well, but it was the same thing. And it stinks even more like when you're in Cormier's division, John Jones' division, something like that. Like, where are you going to go, really? Bellator was the logical place for him to go, so.
Yeah, it's like being Karl Malone in the Jordan era.
Yeah, exactly like that. Like,
as
you're a Hall of Famer, you're just not going to be the top guy.
Yeah, so, but, Bader does have a chore. King Mo you never know kind of which King Mo you're going to get, but he is as high of, he's as high of a level of wrestler as Bader. They, in my opinion, their grappling is even. It's going to be real interesting to see. I think we might see Bader use his stand-up like we've seen him in the past when he's taken on really good wrestling. And he does have good striking. I think it is underrated. It's not, fantastic or this ferocious, but it's steady and he keeps a pace. And it's usually to open up that takedown later on. But again, King Mo has had success. I think he's either 9-1 or 9-0 against heavyweights. So he is a smaller. This fight doesn't really matter because, again, we have
Right.
two light heavyweights fighting each other in the heavyweight tournament. Again, this tournament's kind of whack in that way. But if he, King Mo could make it interesting if he won too, because he does have that experience in the heavyweight division. And I think, because Mitrione's going to fight the winner of that fight in the semifinal. And after seeing Mitrione get taken down ad nauseum towards the end of the fight against Roy Nelson, who doesn't have the level of wrestling of King Mo,
Right.
that kind of worries me if he can handle that. So I think Mitrione could be in trouble both ways, but I think that Roy Nelson's really tough. Again, I think he's super tough, and I think that a number of these guys in the tournament would have gone to sleep with some of those shots that Mitrione hit him with, because he's always been kind of unsuspecting. His knockout punches have never been like these Francis Ngannou types, but
Right.
he puts people away. I mean, Mitrione.
Well,
has
I think that was
knockouts.
Dana White's biggest problem with him, was that he just, when you've got that kind of chin, and you've got that kind of power,
Wants you to fight
but
a
you
little
just kind of I'm not going to say he didn't put the work in, because he's an outstanding fighter, and I'm sure he trains really hard. I don't know him personally, but when you have those kinds of God-given talents and you come in looking like he does,
Right.
I think I've seen maybe 2 fights where he really trimmed it up and looked like he was trying to be the best fighter in the world.
Right.
Every other time you see him, and I know he kind of markets that, he's always rubbing his belly and stuff like that, and that's kind of his gig, that's
Yeah.
his shtick or whatever, but, he could be doing a lot more, honestly. I think he could be doing a lot more. He could be a very dangerous heavyweight, and he still is, but, it sucks not to see his full potential.
Now that we're talking about the Grand Prix here, you mentioned earlier you think that Mir has his side of the bracket. That means you do think he's going to beat Fedor then. Because I think Fedor is, he's shown, Mitrione hit him with one punch. That was amazing. It was almost a double knockout.
Yeah.
Hit each other. It was the first one to get up. And Mitrione, a little bit younger.
Yeah.
Definitely less miles. Well, he was a D1 collegiate football player
Right.
too. So, he does have that. He does have miles. But Fedor, legend, pride. He's been through it all. But, got up and finished him. Do you think that... obviously you think Mir is going to be able to...
I do.
But Mir hasn't fought for a while, though, too.
It kind of bums me out, honestly. I'm a huge Fedor fan, and I hate seeing athletes that stick around too long.
Right.
It just drives me bananas, and I know it's hard to when you really love something as much as these guys do. It's hard to take a step back and say, okay, my time's done. We see it with Fedor. He hasn't looked great at all since the Strikeforce days. He hasn't looked great.
Yeah.
So we see it with Fedor. We saw it with Takanori Gomi, who is my all-time favorite fighter, and that guy is just I want to cry every time I see him fight. He just at this point they're just fighting for paychecks. I hate seeing that. Having said that, I still think Fedor can do some things. I think Mir is going to be a little bit too much for him. And then moving on past that, I thought it was really interesting on the broadcast how they asked Chael Sonnen who he was really watching out for, who he thought was really dangerous, and he kept saying Bader. He didn't say Mir, he didn't say Fedor, he didn't say anything.
Yeah.
He kept saying Ryan
Well,
Bader.
of course,
Ryan Bader's the guy you got to watch.
Chael Sonnen is, a man of opportunity, because I don't know if you saw that when they had King Mo up at the table with Big John and Blazer, and at that point he named, when he was on the same line as King Mo, he said King Mo.
Right.
Because Chael's the king at this, the head game
Yeah,
stuff.
he's in a
and
talk
kind
a
of
bit.
buttering them up, and then kind of when they don't even know it, buttering them
Right.
up, and then kind of stripping them down as we get closer to fight night. But it's so weird to talk about Chael Sonnen in this heavyweight Grand Prix. But kudos to him for getting his the first win out of the way against let's be honest, the bloated Rampage Jackson that has seen better days. But
Hey, it was a good Bellator card as well, too.
It was
there were other good fights. I was really happy with Patricky Pitbull. I thought he looked outstanding against Derek Campos. There's a girl, Heather Hardy, who all the boxing fans know. I've got a 125er who's glaring at me right now because she's dying to fight this girl.
I thought that fight was weird, man. I thought we were going to, we had two boxers come in, and then they were both trying to be like, hey, look, I can ground game.
Right.
And it ended up being kind of I don't know. It was a weird fight. I was expecting kind of a slugfest, but kudos to those girls for trying to expand. But,
and they are trying to learn. They are trying to bring different things to their game. So, you got to give them that. But, hey.
Bellator is coming through, though. It's getting bigger and bigger. I love all the additions. Their broadcast team is really fun. I thought Chell and Goldie together were awesome.
I'm not a fan of Goldie.
Hearing
his voice drives me bananas, but...
It's a nostalgia bit of UFC, in my opinion, but
he does his thing. So props
it's cool.
to him.
They got Big John. They got that whole new crew. So
love Big John. Man, he's amazing behind that booth, man. I love him.
He's incredible. The insight. I was showing my girlfriend UFC. The first, I think it was like UFC 5 or 6. Big John, super young.
Yep.
And I'm like, you recognize him? But anyways, it is exciting. I wish they would have package the fights a little bit differently, like 2 quarterfinal fights in a night.
Right.
But it's going to give us something to talk about over the next few months as we go forward. We'll see. We got Chael Sonnen has one on one side. Matt Mitrione has one on the other side. The other 2 quarterfinal matches will be coming up over the next few months. And I look forward to covering those and seeing what happens. But that's going to do it for segment 2. Remember to catch us on ibtv.us, YouTube, at IBTV and IBTV on Roku. TAKEdown MMA out.